Welcome to SIM-PAC Live, where the rubber meets the road. I'm your host, Jeff Matthews. Today I interview Heather Bone, ESG Director at Team Global Express. Team Global Express was previously known as Toll Global Express, is an Australian-owned freight and transport logistics business, primarily operating across Australia and New Zealand. They operate over 7,000 trucks, 41 planes, 2 ships and 150 properties. The commercial transportation sector is one of the hardest to abate sectors, and it affects all of us. How we move our goods around without adding to their carbon footprint is one of the biggest yet unanswered questions about the energy transition. So it's a real pleasure to have Heather Bone on our show to give us some insight into where we think the whole thing is heading. Welcome, Heather. Heather, when I was looking through your CV to praise it for the introduction, it was too long. You've done some seriously impressive things. And I just wondered if you'd just introduce yourself for the audience to save me missing out what you think is the important bit.
Okay, wow. Okay, I actually started my career in investment banking, would you believe, and discovered fairly quickly that I'm a really bad finance person. But what was interesting was I was doing law at the time, and my honours for law was in sustainable development and corporate governance. And when I went to the law faculty and said, this is what I want to do, this was the late 90s, early noughties, they said, what are you talking about? What's this sustainable development stuff you're talking about? It was really interesting. And from that point in time, I started working in predominantly heavy equipment. So mining, transport, big yellow trucks, big heavy engines, lots of fuel, those things. And my dad used to say to me, why are you a sustainability person working in mining? That doesn't make any sense. And I said, well, where else can you make a difference? So I think when you embed yourself in an organisation that you're passionate about that industry, then it just all seems to come together, right? And here I am at Team Global Express looking after about 7,000 trucks, 2 ships, 41 planes, 1,500 forklifts, about 15,000 people. So it's a pretty incredible place to be. It's all just come together in a miracle at the end, Jeff.
Wonderful. Now, Heather, and also what you do now affects everyone or all your clients, because everyone else, because your scope 1 and 2 emissions, everybody else's scope 3 emissions. And in fact, if you don't have scope 1 and 2, well, no one has to worry about scope 3 almost.
Exactly. We're the problem. Yes.
And you're in the hardest to abate sectors. The transportation, commercial transportation, freight transportation. And I note, I listened to Michael Liebreich and Lauderdale Turner the other day discussing where this is going, out to 2050. And they still have disagreements. I'm sort of actually in Michael Liebreich's camp, by the way. I think Lauderdale Turner's a little ambitious, especially around hydrogen and its role in heavy freight. So we don't have clarity about where we're going. We know we're pursuing routes, but we don't know which one's going to be the technological winner. So we are looking, the viewers are looking to people such as yourself who have in-depth knowledge and are working with the manufacturers and the providers to give us some idea about where this is going, understanding that we actually don't really know yet.
Jeff, it's been a long journey as well. If you think about, for example, sustainable aviation fuel, I started working in SAF, I think in about 2006, so nearly 20 years ago. And I remember at the time some people from Boeing and Qantas and Virgin saying, what do you think is going to happen by 2025? And I said, absolutely, we'll have SAF. We'll have it in big volumes. We'll have technology that can, operate those planes on SAF. But look at us, we're still trying to figure it out. I think sometimes we might underestimate how blooming hard some of these things are going to be to be successful.
Yes. And even and I note the Global Maritime Organisation, whatever its acronym's called, was sort of bracketed e-methanol and e-ammonia together now, and they haven't picked a winner. So
and
even
they're
they
very
don't
different
know.
products.
Yeah, and I suppose when you look at those products and you go, what are the advantages of one versus the advantages of the other, you could debate that till the cows come home. And I see some shipping organisations are going with ammonia, and some are building out methanol.
Yeah, and shipping is, when you think about hard to abate, if you think about trucks being hard to abate and planes being hard to abate, ships take it to a whole new level, because you're only going to be able to make these changes to the ships when they're out of the water. So our two ships, for example, they're actually fairly new. They were sort of 2015, 2016. They're multi-fuel engines. But in order to be able to use different fuel types, you still have to take them out of the water. And that's a huge time and cost commitment for a business to look at doing. I know our team on the ships are very keen to look at methanol. They're really keen to see whether some sort of e-methanol, as we call it, will be compatible with the ships. I don't think that we'll go down an ammonia path. I think that's probably a step into the future, probably the next 5 or 10 years, when the ships are out of the water again after that. But if you think about what you could do right now, you look at A&L, you look at Maersk, some of our big competitors and the international shipping world, and they're looking to biodiesel, they're looking to renewable diesel, they're looking at what are the alternative fuels that we can use in those ships without having to make those modifications. And the same goes for our trucks. We need to have opportunities right now to make these changes that are going to be nowhere near as cost competitive or cost prohibitive for the market, because the more changes we make, the more costly it is for the consumer, and the consumer can't bear that cost. The cost has to go somewhere, right? So if you look at our trucks, for example, there's probably only a handful of things that we can really do with our trucks into the future. So one is, absolutely, light and medium rigids will likely be electric vehicles. They're going shorter distances, they're taking lighter loads, and we're working very, very closely with our OEMs on where we might be able to roll out electric vehicles, as an example. But it's going to be in a particular area of the market, a particular segment. At the higher end of the market, at the longer distances, heavier payloads, we know at some point in time hydrogen will be real, probably about the same time as Australia accepting nuclear energy, it might be a while away. But it's certainly not going to be real, I would say, in this decade. I would say we'll have 1s and 2 trucks, a bit the way we have EVs at the moment, but we're not likely to have hydrogen in reality until, I would say, next decade sometime. So in the meantime, we have to have a solution now, which means that we have to be more efficient with what we're doing. We have to have different trailer configurations to make sure that we are being the most efficient that we can be, that we're optimising our operations in the best way. Critically for us, we have to have renewable diesel. We have to have a biodiesel that's been hydrocracked, so it's chemically indecipherable for our engines, and we can use them in all of our engines now. So, think back to what I mentioned about SAF. SAF and renewable diesel, or HVO is sometimes known, particularly in Europe, they are 2 fractions of the same renewable barrel of oil. And they are absolutely critical at the moment. So, if I was an investor in Australia, I would be looking at how do I invest in either the feedstocks for renewable diesel or the technology to produce it locally.
And are you looking, like, obviously we're talking about conversion of existing rolling stock, but as rolling stock ages and gets replaced, the next replacement vehicles you're getting, are you looking at electric? Are you in that mode at the moment, that what your next purchases will be low emission?
Oh, absolutely. Whether that's electric vehicles for light and medium rigids, or whether or not it's Euro 6 for our prime movers and our heavier fleet, absolutely. We have to get lower emission vehicle technology now. Although Australia is lagging the rest of the world, we're only mandating Euro 6 at the end of next year. The end of 2024. I think Europe has had it in place for at least 10 years by the time that comes along to Australia. So absolutely, the new fleets that we are getting in are the lowest emitting technology possible for that application of the truck, of the vehicle. But there's not one magic silver bullet. There's not one magic solution. It's not like we're going to have all EVs. It's simply not going to be possible to transition all of that fleet over to electric vehicles, not only because the fleet doesn't exist at the moment. Heavy electric vehicles don't exist at the moment, or they're just coming into Australia. So we're starting, as an example, to see Volvo and Daimler with Mercedes bringing in much higher prime movers, higher payloads, longer distances, that sort of thing. But then you have to think about what is the implication for our grid network. That energy has to come from somewhere. We need it to come quickly, efficiently. We don't have our trucks parked up just waiting to charge. It's not like pulling up into a service station where you can happily sit there for a few hours while it charges. So the impact on our grid is going to be enormous. I did a quick back of the envelope calculation just before you and I got on the call, and at the moment, as an entity, and we have 144 depots, we use about, give or take, between sort of 40 and 45 gigawatts, let's say 50 gigawatt hours of energy every year. That, in the first instance, has to be coming from renewable sources, which it's not at the moment. If we transitioned just our light and medium rigids, so say 2,000 of our vehicles, that would change our energy demand from that 50 gigawatts to probably about 250 gigawatts of energy. That's a huge impact on the energy grid capacity in Australia. And that's just one entity. Imagine if everyone decides to go electric vehicles. So I would say there will be a place for EVs.
Yep.
There'll be a place for liquid hydrogen injection into internal combustion engines. There will absolutely need to be renewable diesel. So we're not going to have one solution, we're going to have a multitude of solutions.
Yep. Yeah. Interesting. I watched a video over the weekend of Tesla, the new Tesla trucks with Pepsi and their depot in Sacramento. And, they're recharging those trucks to 95% in 20 minutes. But they've installed a large battery capacity to charge it. And they work with the utility to stabilise the grid and take that energy, because, as you know, California will be like parts of Australia, that there's going to be a lot of excess energy in the grid, usually in late mornings when lots of solar comes in, and that's going to have to be stored and utilised later. So, yeah, it doesn't look operationally, they're saying that it will pay back, but there's a big capital. Somebody described it as buying your next 10 years fuel up front.
That's a really good way, I think, to put it. It's a bit. I heard this wonderful analogy about emissions, and it was about how it's like asking. You need to go on a diet. It's like asking someone else to go on your diet for you and then going to McDonald's and getting breakfast. It's going to be interesting to see.
Yes, I've publicly outspoken against how the aluminium industry is not doing enough. And the analogy I use, because they use it, is they claim they're decarbonising, and they're not. In fact, it's people like you and me buy household solar and we're decarbonising the grid. And I say it's like your next door neighbour buying an electric vehicle and you claiming you've helped decarbonise the neighbourhood.
Exactly. That's it, exactly.
So and this is why people are looking to their transport and freight providers, because they can do a whole lot in their own businesses, and manufacturing businesses and small businesses to reduce their emissions. But once the goods leave the door, they're not in control of the process, and that's why it's really interesting to hear from you. Can we talk about, have you got priority areas? I mean, are you looking at decarbonising your smaller vehicles first? Have you got a schedule? Have you got a strategy of what you're going to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And although I think, my treasurer would probably kill me if I told you exactly what that was, because the cost is just hideous. And when you think about transport, the margins in transport, they're in the 1s and 2s and 3%. So if I then look to changing over that fleet, that either the business goes broke or the cost goes somewhere. That's why I always keep saying, the cost has to go somewhere. So if you think about our plans for the next 1 to 5, 10 years, I think we're going to see an exponential change in behaviour around the fleet, and an exponential purchase change, because we're just seeing technology is not going at a nice rate like that. Technology is going, whee! And so we're going to have a lot of different opportunities. But when I refer to cost, to give you a bit of perspective around electric vehicles, and this only relates to, again, light and medium rigids, the total cost of ownership, when you look at that compared to an ICE vehicle and being an internal combustion engine vehicle, the total cost of ownership of an equivalent ICE to an EV is more than double. More than double. And it's not like the ICE vehicles are going down in cost and EVs aren't coming down in cost, because critical rare earth minerals that go into the batteries, the lithiums and these sorts of things, they're not coming down in cost either. So I would say, instead of electric vehicles coming down in cost in the way you would expect your mobile phone to maybe come down in cost, they're not doing that. In actual fact, the diesel vehicles are coming up. So while EVs might come down a little bit, it's actually the diesel vehicles are coming up to meet that sort of parity. And that's just only the truck. So we have to remember that when you talk about an electric vehicle, particularly an electric truck, you're not just talking about a truck, you're talking about a total energy management system. So I'll give you the example of our Bungarity site. So we've been very, very fortunate in working together with ARENA, Australia's Renewable Energy Agency, as the recipient for a grant to install 60 electric vehicles. It's going to be a huge project, a huge transition and change for that site. At that site, we have kilometres of conveyor systems, and you go in at certain times of the day and you've got hundreds of thousands of parcels whizzing around. It's incredible to see. But we had to be very particular about where we were going to situate the trucks on site to charge, what times of the day they're going to charge, in order to avoid peak load and peak capacity and the pricing that goes along with that. We're needing to educate our drivers around, yes, they might pull up and plug in, but that plug is not actually going to be turned on until probably about 8:30 at night. So the smarts that go around it as well. And that's putting aside any fear or frustration around safety issues or trip hazards and all of these sorts of things. So we've had to work really closely with our energy provider to make sure that we're not tipping over into a load that we simply don't have coming into that site. So there's all of these other things around the edges.
And I know that one of the earlier conversions to electricity was actually a mining site in Europe, and they set up a division to manage their energy. And the division actually became profitable because it was buying and selling energy during the day and night, and they were trading energy. And that's one of the things I was going to ask you about too, because it's going to be clear that 90% of all the batteries manufactured on Earth are going to go into EVs. And so it means that no grid will be able to build enough battery capacity. Its EV capacity is going to be 90% of its battery capacity. So the grids will have to use EVs to be able to have two-way, trading of energy. And so you're actually, if you get enough together, you'll actually support the grid in terms of when it's low by putting your energy back in and then getting it back later at a cheaper cost.
That's it exactly, Jeff. We need to actually think of, so we've got BESS, or we call it BESSY, which is a 1 megawatt battery energy storage system coming to the Bungarraby site to support those 60 trucks. We have solar on the roof at the moment, but it's only about the equivalent of 25 or so % capacity of what that site actually needs. So what I would like to do is use the battery in exactly the way you've described, so that we can start arbitraging those costs, and making some money at times that we wouldn't normally anticipate. Another thing we're looking at doing, Jeff, in a similar sort of mindset, is we have a lot of on-site storage tankage for liquid fuel. So at the moment, diesel.
Yes.
Those diesel tanks also support on-site generators, so that if the power goes down, the generators immediately kick in. What about if we used renewable diesel or biodiesel in those generators at 100%? And so we start arbitraging the market at peak load. So we know there's a peak load coming. We know that summer's coming. We know that come 4 o'clock in the afternoon, all of a sudden our pricing is going to spike. So putting aside EVs and the batteries, what about if we just use renewable diesel with a generator to take us off the grid for a period of time and play the market a little bit, exactly as you described, become an energy trader? Yes,
the IEA in this year's energy outlook, they made a statement about demand side response, which I haven't seen before from them. And as you know, the IEA can be behind and conservative with their outlook. And their statement was, we need to decouple our industrial processes from demand in the grid. And that's exactly what you put. And if people aren't thinking at your scale and not thinking about decoupling the operations from demand in the grid, that's when we're going to get in trouble. That's when we're going to get out of the control duck curves and all of that. So, so it's interesting you're doing that. You've also probably got, if you've got all those big tanks, you've probably got enough space for some vanadium flow redux batteries, some serious tanks of, because it looks like those batteries are going to become really, they're looking at installing them in other places that are feeding EVs, just because they're big and heavy and they've got some incredible capacity and they're cheap compared to, the lithium derivatives, of batteries. So let's come to, and we've touched on your trucks and your fleet, and we earlier touched on shipping. Now I'll come back to shipping because last week you might have seen the Chinese have got their first container shipping electrification route up, an inland route. And for those who haven't seen it, it's a container ship. It takes, the batteries are containerised, 44 containers are put onto the ship to run the ship. And it runs an inland route, and then halfway it offloads the containers and onloads. And it seems clear that I know you're a fan of biodiesel, but it seems clear that the shorter routes, which is the majority of routes actually, look like electrifications. Running ahead of the pack. Let's say it's not the winner yet. It's just got, it's got its nose in front. What's your feeling about that? I mean, did you watch that with interest at all?
Yeah, I actually found that really interesting, but perhaps actually for a slightly different reason to you. So, as I said, we have 2 ships that go back and forth between the mainland and Tasmania. So our main competitor there has been incredibly smart, very, very, very smart operator, the gentleman who owns the business. And what he's been doing is he's actually got gas ships, so LNG gas ships, and he puts his own B doubles full of gas on the ship so that he doesn't need to rely on filling up at either end. He can fill it up as he goes.
Yeah.
And it's really smart. And yes, it's gas, and gas it's only going to reduce your emissions so far. It's maybe 10%. So, there's still a long way to go. But I think that the opportunity that the Chinese are doing in a similar way with those batteries is really smart. You've got to think about, well, you're going to lose an amount of payload because of the weight of those batteries, but you're going to make up for it for the fact that it makes your energy flow through a little bit smarter. I'd like to see as well, a lot of questions that I get are around, or what are you going to do with batteries at end of life? When we talk about end of life of the batteries, it means on our trucks that they've come down to 80%. Similar to your phone. So as soon as they go down underneath 80%, then batteries are supposedly at end of life for that vehicle. But we're going to be looking at, well, how do we consolidate those batteries? We take them out of that truck, but we put them all together so that we have battery banks using recycled batteries. So what's going to be the opportunity there? And we're only very, very early days of how do we start optimising that as well.
Yes. And I think in the future, people are looking about their own cars and, what do I do when I renew the battery? You'll use it as a household battery.
Exactly.
You'll be able to, those batteries, you'll be able to plug and play them into your house eventually when you renew them. And so, yes, thrown away I was talking to the Battery Recycling Association the other day. Quite an interesting chat, and I'm going to interview their CEO this week, I think. So it's quite end of life, and look, good you brought that up, because we all need to be thinking about end of life before we bring anything into this world.
We need to start thinking about the full circle, and I don't know if it's still the same fellow at battery recycling, but it was started by the same gentleman in Canberra who started Tyre Stewardship Australia as well. So he's thinking outside the box of, well, what do we do with these things at end of life? Because absolutely, it's not just batteries for us. On our vehicle, what do we do with tyres at end of life? There are different ways to either recycle tyres or break them down back into the original hydrocarbons. So when you come at it from a total circular economy, we have a lot of problems to solve outside of energy. What do we then do with those batteries? What do we do with tyres? What do we do with the scrap metals? And the metal industry has shown they're incredibly smart at recycling metals. We've just got to figure out what's the best and lowest cost optimised option.
And we just got to start doing it in Australia too, because
Exactly.
I was shocked. I got shocked last week, which it doesn't. I thought, Australia will be recycling aluminium. It's pretty easy to recycle. No, it's all going offshore. Australians drink 6 billion aluminium cans a year. 6 billion.
Yeah.
And then we ship it probably maybe one of yours, but ship it in one of these ships to Indonesia, where they burn coal-fired power to recycle it. And my issue with that is that, and I'm guilty of it, saying that aluminium is this beautiful metal and it's infinitely recyclable. But as I just said, there's nothing infinitely recyclable about sending it in a ship to Indonesia to recycle it with a coal-fired power. So, so we've got to get better. And in fact, I think the solution, this is where I believe in regulation. With batteries, lead-acid batteries, Australia made it illegal to export them, and there's a great recycling industry here now, and we recycle all these lead-acid batteries. But we've got to ban scrap, and we're not the only ones. The UK exports something. I think it's near 600,000 tonnes a year, and recycle none in the UK.
Yeah. Isn't it a sad testament to some of the countries around the world that's exactly what happens? My understanding is we don't actually recycle any of the metals here. We send them offshore, exactly as you've described, and then they come back to us in more Coca-Cola cans and that sort of thing. It's madness.
Yes. Okay, let's get back to transport. So air. You've got a few of your own planes, have you?
41 at last count.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we still don't know where we're going with this. There's a few. It looks as though, again, in short haul flights, electrification, batteries seems to have got its nose in front at the moment, with lots of people pursuing that. Hydrogen doesn't really seem to be a goer, and not because you can't run a fuel cell plane. That's the easy bit. It's actually storing the hydrogen that's
exactly.
That's not going to make that a winner. And beyond that, long haul travel, we've got to come up with some sort of e-fuel or SAF. And we just still don't know where that is. Have you got any? Your inside running, where do you think that's going to go?
As I said, I thought 20 years ago that we would be far more advanced with SAF than we actually are. So our freight, because we don't do any passenger travel, of course, we do freight, and I think after Qantas and Virgin, we are the biggest freight provider. We're also one of the biggest, if not the biggest, users of their belly freight as well. So the belly of the plane when it's moving around. The sort of product that goes on our planes, though, when it's priority, it has to be there. There's no option around that. We do a lot of medical freight. One that I'm really, really proud of is we move blood around Australia. So when you go and donate blood, and I'm an avid blood donor, that blood all gets packaged up and goes into remote and regional areas just as much as it gets used in the city areas. And so we're constantly moving blood around the country. And the head of our aviation division is very proud of moving the occasional elephant, or horse, race horses. So we do some really interesting freight on those planes. But it also means that there's not really any opportunity for that to fail. You do not want airline freight to not get there for whatever reason that is, let alone, and I would hate to think of some sort of catastrophic event of one of those planes going down. So the airlines have been incredibly strict in the ways that they've started thinking about sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. And that is, they're saying that not only does it have to meet the fuel quality standard, excuse me as my ear pops out, you have to meet a fuel quality standard, which is the highest quality standard you can possibly have. But they're also saying, we want you to have made that fuel in the most sustainable way as well. So the fuel has to come from particular feedstocks, approved feedstocks. It has to have come through a particular technology pathway, so an approved technology pathway. The aviation industry has been very strong in saying that they don't want the feedstocks to be any sort of competition with food sources, for example. So the ethanol to Jet A that they've been working on for some years, you need to make sure that the ethanol is coming from a waste product rather than a food grade source. They don't want to have that conflict. So SAF it's this great, bright, shiny object that governments like to focus on, as our governments do, but it's also probably the hardest one to try and accommodate, and the pricing of that is exactly, it's 6 times the price of the equivalent Jet A. There's also big issues around SAF in the way that our airports have been set up around the country. So if you look at the owners of those airport corporations, the whole concept of a JUHI, what we call a JUHI, is it's a joint users network of infrastructure. So all of the fuel coming in and out is going through pipes that are owned by some sort of joint venture, which is the airport corporation. And inevitably, that joint venture has a number of fossil fuel providers at the table as one of the owners of the airport corporation as well. We don't own any airport corporation, but I can guarantee that most of Australian, certainly the larger airports, there will be a big brand at the table who owns that JUHI.
Where isn't the fossil fuel industry got its fingers?
No.
Well, they got their hands on COP at the moment. The next COP.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see with the new leader for the COP being very immersed in the fossil fuel industry.
Right. Okay. Look, last question. A little bit about your role, because I think you're director ESG. Is that
correct? Yep, director ESG.
So, yeah, and ESG seems to be, and this term that sort of emerged quite quickly, and there are a lot of people on the ground look at ESG as the corporations were so quick to adopt it. You thought, there's something going on here. Is this an excuse?
Going on?
Is this an excuse to just put a name on something and do nothing? And do nothing in terms of because a sustainability director of sustainability and a director of ESG are two different things, and one's got the environment in mind and one's got the company in mind. And so it therefore comes to the company's ethics of whether they use somebody like yourself in a way that's going to hopefully make a difference and change the planet, or whether they use somebody like yourself who's just going to count the pennies for the companies. And obviously companies have got to make money, because if they don't, they're not in business, and that's not sustainable anyway. So, how have you found your ESG role? Do you find there's a conflict between putting the company first and putting the environment first, or how do you view that? Because in the earlier conversation you started talking a lot about the cost, because the costs have got to go somewhere. If the company can't afford it, then your customers will have to pay the bill, which is correct. Somebody's got to pay the bill.
Someone's got to pay, exactly.
So I was just wondering how you manage that role, and because your heart seems to be in sustainability.
It is, Jeff, absolutely. And I think if we take a step back, the term ESG probably arose out of, you might have previously heard it as corporate social responsibility or triple bottom line reporting, where you're trying to report on the environment, the social and the governance. So my role and that of my team is very broad. If you think about the governance part, we look after anti-bribery and corruption, modern slavery, making sure that we're abiding by, and we have robust policies and procedures in place to manage our governance frameworks. Just this morning I was finalising this year's modern slavery statement. So we cover a very broad church of information, I guess, there. On the social front, we focus a lot on our Indigenous relations, but very much as well around diversity and inclusion more broadly. So I sit on our Pride Committee, and we work on not only Indigenous but also LGBTQI+. But absolutely, I would say 90% of our focus is on the E, and the reason for that is because those are things that we have to do. Those are the regulatory requirements that we need to be driving down our emissions. I am incredibly lucky, I have to say, because my CEO, a lady by the name of Christine Holgate, is just the most passionate person about ESG. Absolutely so passionate that without a shadow of a doubt, there is never a time that I would go to Christine and she would say, no, I think that's a dumb idea. She will always be there to support ESG. So I think what we're finding now is, your description is spot on. I would say pre-COVID, if I was in this role, it would be a ticker box sort of exercise. Now, though, ESG people who are not only passionate about sustainability, but are thinking of innovative opportunities to overcome these issues, that's the exciting part of the role. And to have this support from Christine, from our board, we're owned by private equity, and they are incredibly passionate about ESG. So, although there are frequently times that I go to our finance team and say, can I do this? And they go, no. No, you can't do that. There's never a time that I've ever gone to the CEO or to the board and said, hey, I really want to do this. And if you think about the electric vehicle trial that we're doing at Bungarraby, when I went to the board and said, how do you feel about losing millions of dollars to put electric vehicles in place? Because, don't be under any illusion that the grant funding actually covers the cost. We're going to be losing about $25 million in order to put that in place. to have the board and to have Christine say, yep, go for it, absolutely, we will support you. But we've got to make sure that makes sense in future times as well, that we as a company, we as an industry can't afford to just be losing money. The world doesn't work that way. But I am incredibly lucky that I've got the support of an executive who's incredibly passionate. And I go and see a huge number of our customers. And what's interesting is we're starting to see the change in the customer as well, in that it used to be I would go into the room and say, hey, we want to do this. How would you be prepared about collaborating on something that, yeah, you're probably not going to make money. Hopefully you don't lose money, but you're not going to make a heap of money, but it's the right thing to do. It used to be the customers would look at me like, what? You want us to do what? Whereas now the customers are going, okay, well, let's think about it. Because my argument, Jeff, is unless we are collaborating as a nation, as an industry, as a team, we have to collaborate or we're not going to be successful with these ESG things. We're just not. So people like me feel like Groundhog Day, but finally people are saying, hey, we actually as a world have to collaborate to get a better outcome.
Yeah, totally. We, no one's going to do it alone. And as I said at the start, your Scope 1 and 2 emissions are somebody else's Scope 3 emissions. And yeah. Look, Heather, that was a great interview. Thank you very much. I learned a lot. I love your passion. It's great. You're a person like me, and I'm so looking forward to having you as a panelist at SIM-PAC 2024. And good luck with everything. And when you're ready to have somebody do some broadcasting of your trial results of your electrification, I'd love to come up and have a look.
Absolutely, Jeff. And I have a feeling that SIM-PAC is on right about the time that hopefully everything is going to be starting to be plugged in, and the lights are going to flash up, and we'll have these bright yellow pieces of infrastructure all lined up we call them the minions. They look like little minions all lined up. So I will very much look forward to the conference, because hopefully by then I'll have some photos to show everyone in the room.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Heather.
You're welcome, Jeff. Nice to talk. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.